You're going through an old box in the hallway, the kind that's been taped shut since your last move, and your hand closes around a small wooden bridge, the kind a model train set used to run over. It's missing its other half, has been since you were a kid. You built it with someone who left before you were old enough to understand what leaving even meant, and somehow you kept the broken piece anyway. It sat on a shelf in every apartment you've had since. A bridge that goes nowhere, connects nothing, just sits there as proof that you once reached towards something and it didn't reach back the same way. Here's what I want you to sit with today. You think tomorrow's eclipse is going to take something from you. It isn't. What it's actually doing is stopping the sky from asking you to keep making yourself smaller so other people don't have to stretch toward you. And that withdrawal of demand, at first, feels like loss. It feels like something's being removed, but it's not a removal. It's the first draft of room you get to stand in. You'll know this pattern if you've ever caught yourself trimming a sentence down mid-breath, cutting the real size of what you were asking for until it sounds easy to say no to. Or if you've felt actual relief when a conversation wrapped up before you had to name what you needed, and you called that relief peace, when it was just avoidance wearing peace's clothes. Or if you've apologized for taking up the exact amount of space a moment honestly required, like your normal size was somehow an imposition on the room. Here's the insight underneath all of it. Shrinking was never humility. It was a toll. You were paying it so other people wouldn't have to build anything toward you, wouldn't have to stretch, wouldn't have to meet you halfway. So tonight, before you do anything else, write down one sentence you've been shrinking before it even leaves your mouth. And tomorrow, before the eclipse peaks, say the full-size version out loud to one person, not the trimmed one, the whole thing. Now let's talk about what's actually happening up there, because the mechanics matter. At 4 degrees and 51 minutes, the moon in Pisces stands at the far end of a bridge from the sun in Virgo, and these two shores want opposite things. Virgo wants proof, structure, the visible receipt of effort, something you can point to and say, I earned this. Pisces wants release. The invisible ache finally let out into open water, no explanation required. Virgo asks, what did you actually do to deserve this? Pisces answers, nothing. I just stopped holding my breath. That gap between the two shores, that's where you've been standing this whole time. One foot planted on each side, refusing to commit to either bank. Tomorrow's eclipse doesn't let you keep standing there. It forces the step. And every sign is going to feel this bridge differently, feel that step differently, depending on where these degrees land in your chart. So we're not rushing through all 12 at once tonight. We're covering them across 4 separate chapters, moving through them in small groups, so each one gets the actual depth it deserves instead of a rushed mention. Stay with me, because your sign is coming, and what it reveals about the bridge you've been standing on might be the part of this you weren't ready to hear yet. Virgo, here's what shrinking costs you specifically. Hours. Real hours, this week, spent perfecting something that was already sufficient at 6 in the evening, because some old rule told you competence only counts if it hurts. You're at your desk at midnight, rereading a report that was fine hours ago, adding steps nobody asked for, just to make the effort undeniable, even though the outcome was never in question. You've confused being useful with being allowed to exist, and the toll for that keeps going up without you noticing. The eclipsed moon sits opposite your sign, and it floods the exact certainty you use as armor with something that doesn't need to be earned to be real. So submit the work once, at the first version that actually meets the requirement, and don't reopen the file to add proof you were tired. What you get back is rest, not the collapsed kind. The kind where effort and worth stop needing a toll booth between them. Gemini, you're at a dinner table shifting your opinion mid-sentence because you clocked someone's face change, finishing the thought in a version that was never actually yours. You agree first, and figure out what you think 3 hours later, alone, in the car, when it's already too late to matter. Here's the contradiction. You think you're keeping the peace, but you're actually starting a quiet war with yourself, one where you're never on your own side first. The eclipse touches your house of close bonds and softens the exact reflex that reaches for the safe sentence instead of the true one. So in your next conversation, say your first actual opinion out loud before you've had time to edit it for the room. What comes back to you is voice, one language instead of 2, spoken by someone who no longer needs a translator for their own mind. Pisces, you're crying at a commercial and you can't explain why, until you realize it isn't the commercial. It's 3 weeks of somebody else's grief you agreed to carry without ever being asked. You feel drained, leaving rooms you weren't even the center of. So which feeling in your body this week actually started somewhere else? The eclipse lands almost exactly on your degree, so the flood isn't a metaphor, it's tide reaching real shore. Name one borrowed feeling out loud and hand it back simply by not acting on it. What you regain is an edge, a shore with a boundary, instead of a low point where everyone else's weather quietly drains. None of this finishes today. The toll booth, the second language, the tide, they loosen before they disappear. But this moon doesn't stay full and eclipsed for long, and the window to act while the old pattern is visible is closing fast, so use it before the ordinary noise of the week covers it back up. Somebody asks what you actually think about the plan, and you give the funny answer instead. It lands, everyone laughs, and you've said nothing at all. This is the move you make constantly, and you've told yourself it's lightness. It isn't. You've been keeping your real opinions vague, so nobody can hold the smaller, safer version against you later. Vague costs nothing up front, but afterward, there's this flatness, like you dodged something and won nothing in the trade. Here's the harder part. This eclipse falls in your house of foundations, and it's not asking what you believe in theory. It's asking what you'd actually build if nobody could revise the blueprint on you later. That question threatens something in you, because as long as everything stays a joke, nothing is ever really yours to defend. A joke isn't a position, it's a place to hide one. So try this. Give one direct, undodged answer this week to something you'd normally deflect. Just one. Give it 24 real hours and watch whether the room collapses the way the old fear promised. It won't. What you regain is voice, an actual one, not the version that performs freedom while avoiding it. You finish something, it pays off, and that same night you start a new project instead of sitting inside the win. The instant something goes right, you feel restless, like satisfaction is a room you never learned how to stay in. You've mistaken constant motion for proof that you haven't stopped long enough to actually want something. Here's the result before the explanation. You'll feel exposed, briefly, doing nothing after a win. That exposure is the cost of this pattern finally catching up to you. The cause is simpler than it looks. Stillness has always felt like danger, so you keep replacing feeling with doing. This eclipse sits in your house of hidden patterns and shows you the exact second you make that swap. So don't start the next thing. Let one recent win sit unspoiled. No next move, no new plan, just the win, witnessed by you. You don't have to sprint off a bridge to prove you crossed it. What you regain is rest, the kind you've been outrunning for years. You're staying somewhere past its expiration date, a job, a room, a routine, and calling it stability. This eclipse lands in your house of change through others, and it's asking a blunt question. Who benefits from you staying exactly this still? First you notice a low tiredness that isn't physical, then you notice what it's attached to. Then, if you're honest, you notice who it's actually protecting, and it's rarely you. Not everything that doesn't move is solid, so name the one thing you're keeping out of fear rather than value, and set an actual date this month to release it. Not someday, a date. The eclipse isn't demanding a leap from you, it's just making the expiration date finally visible, the one you've been avoiding reading. So this week, state one, personal, specific need. Not, people deserve this. I need this. The bridge stops being theoretical, built only in conversation, and becomes something you actually walk on. Because if you keep abstracting what you want, you'll stay surrounded by people who admire your principles and still have no idea how to actually help you, and that's a quiet cost that never announces itself. What you get back, the moment you say the specific sentence, is recognition, real recognition, aimed at you instead of at the idea. 12 signs, and every one of them touch this eclipse in some way, which means every one of you watching has a piece of this story, whether your sun sign was center stage or standing quietly in the wings. That's the part people miss. You don't need the spotlight sign to be changed by the light. Remember that broken wooden bridge sitting in the hallway box. Half a span, splintered clean, shoved out of sight, because looking at it felt worse than forgetting it. Here's the contradiction nobody warns you about. You kept that broken piece for years, telling yourself it was proof you tried, when really it was permission to stop trying. Proof and permission wore the same face, and you couldn't tell them apart in the dark. The eclipse doesn't hand you a finished bridge. It's not that generous, and honestly, it's not that kind of event. What it does is quieter and stranger. It takes away the old excuse for leaving that broken piece in the box, gathering dust as evidence you once reached and then stopped reaching. So what happens when the excuse disappears and the bridge is just sitting there, waiting, and there's nothing left standing between you and picking it back up? You reach again. Not small this time, Not testing the weight with one finger. Full size, both hands, the way you reached before life talked you out of it. And something in you already knows the bridge on the shelf now stands upright, whole enough to hold your weight, whole enough to hold exactly what you're finally willing to put on it. Not more than that. Not less. If some part of you just stopped shrinking to fit a room that never actually required it, subscribe to Hidden Wisdom. The sky builds the next bridge tomorrow.